it comes out completely different. So what causes the change? How does World War I alter America? Before World War I, it was this. After World War I, it was that. This is how it caused the change. This is why it caused the change. In its simplest form. That is, an argument that can be made. So we're going to finish up World War I today. And then next class, you're going to do the Unit 9 test. You're going to do the multiple choice section. And that will be 50 questions. You already have the review sheet for that. And then that should take 38 minutes, and we'll get started doing the 1920s afterwards. The following class period, you are going to then write the DBQ, the progressive DBQ, the 2003 Form B DBQ. If I were you, I would go online to to the AP Central website, apcentral.collegeboard.com or .org or .net or whatever it is. Oh, that's okay. What do you got for me? Oh. Okay, thanks. Yeah, these will get passed out later. Take care of that. Anyway, so, Timmy, where was I, buddy? College Board, yeah. If you go to the apcentral.collegeboard.com net org website, and you go to exams and information, and you click on the APUS thing, you go to the 2003 column, and it's got the Form B DBQ, and it's got sample responses. If I were you, I would read those sample responses. I don't have time to do that in class. This would be an example of independence and initiative on your part. If you want to be a better writer, read those examples. That's what, that's what crappy writing looks like. It's what mediocre, okay writing looks like, and it's what excellent writing looks like. There's a 3, there's a 6, there's a 9. Read them. And think about how you would approach the question. How would you write it? And compare what you would do to the 3, the 6, and the 9. The low, the medium, the high. Okay? And then take a look at what makes the 6 a 6. What makes the 9 a 9? What makes it excellent? Essays that score high demonstrate a mastery of the material. And it's not just this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened. Document A is a cartoon. Document B is the Neil Reynolds report. Document C is Jane Addams. That's a 3. Telling me what the documents are. That's a 3. At the most. Understanding how the information in the documents reinforces an argument that you are constructing. That then gets you a higher score. And remembering that it's not just documents that you're using, it's outside information. Okay, it's stuff that you already know. So, you've already done the document analysis. You've already done the prep work, ostensibly, for this DBQ. Now you go write it. We'll see what happens. Okay? You're going to write a DBQ for progressives. We'll write a DBQ for the 1920s. I'm telling you that right now. Those are my 2 predictions, progressives in the 1920s. All right. And that will take, a DBQ is normally an hour, but it's an hour because there's a 15-minute mandatory document reading analysis section. But you've already done that. You've already read the documents. You've already analyzed them. Yes. Yes, A204.
No.
Oh,
She's at the meetings.
Yeah, she's downstairs in E10 something or other.
Okay.
Yeah. It's going to be one of these days. You can tell already. All right. So that's what's coming down the pike. All right, so let's get into World War I, shall we? All right. So Wilson declares war. We're going to make the world safe for democracy. That's great. So how does America go to war? America declares war in April 1917, but doesn't put any boots on the ground in Europe until January 1918. There's a reason for that. It takes a while for America to get ready to go to war. We weren't ready to go to war. We were not ready to fight a war in Europe. Wilson takes us to war, but we're not ready to go. So we spend the rest of 1917 ramping up, getting what's called mobilized. So the first thing we got to do is we got to get soldiers, and I mean toot sweet. So Wilson is going to enact the first draft since the Civil War, and they're going to start drafting people into the American military. It's called the Selective Service Act, and you're going to see a Selective Service Act in World War II as well. And I might as well make this point. World War I and World War II are essentially like Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. It's the same basic story, same basic players. It's just the second one's got better special effects and a bigger budget. Okay? So a lot of what you're going to see in World War I, you're going to see in World War II as well. So there is a draft. There is recruitment and trying to get people to join up. The draft doesn't get everybody, but they do try to get people to join the military, appealing to people's manhood. Oh, if I could fight, I'd be a Marine. I mean, that's basically calling guys out, calling them wusses if they don't join the Marines. There you go. This is a great poster. I love this poster. By the way, if you were an ad executive back in the early 20th century, you know, one day you're selling Campbell's soup and Kellogg's cornflakes. The next day you're trying to sell a war. So they would hire ad executives to do these posters, to come up with images that would be appealing and appeal to people's psychology here. What is the psychology at work in this poster? Can you tell? It does look like King. I remind you of King Kong because you've got the mad brute, the ape. You notice the helmet here with the spike on it. So what does that tell you? German. That's German, absolutely. He's got a woman in his arms. What is the message of that illustration? There is a message there. There is a psychological undercurrent there. Yeah.
If we don't destroy the Germans now, they'll come to our home and take our women.
That's exactly it. I know I'm off camera, but yes, that is exactly it. It is an appeal to Americans to protect your women. Because look at what the Germans are doing in Europe now. In Belgium, I don't know if you guys have ever read about World War I or the rape of Belgium, but they are taking that story and running with it here and trying to appeal to men's sense of honor to protect their women. So absolutely. I mean, these posters really do, I think, a good job of appealing to primal instincts in men. You don't join, you're a wuss. You don't join, they're going to come take your daughters. That's primal instincts. That's good coffee. How are you going to pay for a war? Well, you're going to borrow a lot of money and you're going to print a lot of money, but also you're going to get people involved by buying war bonds. War bonds are a way that people can feel that they are a part of the success without actually having to join the fight. I gave money to the government in the form of a war bond. They gave me a piece of paper. The promise behind the war bond is that if the U.S. wins the war, you get your money back plus interest. So it's a money-making opportunity, it inspires and engenders patriotism, and it makes people feel as if they are a part of the success. That is what happens when you take a country to war. You have to take the entire country to war. You can't just take 1% of the country to war and tell the other 99% to go out shopping. If you're going to take a country to war, you damn well better take the entire country to war. Sorry, a bit of my personal proclivities coming out. Here, you're mobilizing everybody, soup to nuts. Citizens, soldiers, workers, everybody. Everybody's got a part to play. And everybody has to sacrifice for the greater good. The government is going to coordinate business, resources, and labor. We have got to make sure, if we're going to fight a war, we've got to have guns and ships and tanks, which are invented in World War I, and more guns and grenades and all the other technological innovations that made World War I a game changer. We need that technology and those industrial products. But America in 1917 is busy making furniture, trucks, trains, heavy industry, consumer appliances, whatever. So you've got to convert those factories from making those consumer goods to making wartime materials. And the factories don't know what the government needs, so there has to be a government agent, in this case it was Bernard Baruch, who's there to tell the businesses, we need machine guns, we need battleships, we need grenades. And to coordinate with those businesses and the resources used to make those things. The steel mills, the coal mines, the mineral mines, the copper mines, whatever. You've got to coordinate the resources. And you've got to make sure that the workers working in those factories are doing the work the way you want them to do it. So you give workers a little bit more pay. You give them better working conditions. You ensure that they are happy. Because the last thing you need during the middle of a war is a union strike. So the government, under the War Industries Board and the National War Labor Board, are going to coordinate. The government is telling business what to make and how much to make. That is something we've never really done. I mean, that is a top-down approach. Now, you're going to see the same thing during World War II as well. What was it called? The war... Oh, I can't remember what it was called. I haven't gotten to World War II yet. People are asked to sacrifice. Sacrifice a little bit of meat on Mondays and a little bit of wheat on Wednesdays. Do your patriotic duty and we can feed our soldiers. Voluntary rationing. This is the brainchild of Herbert Hoover. Another one of those smartest guys in the room from the first graduating class of Stanford University in 1893. You know how Herbert Hoover made his first million? Designing hydroelectric dams. The Ah, that's why he gets the Hoover Dam named after him. Yes. Correct. But he runs the Food Administration during World War I. He's the guy making sure that the soldiers are getting the food that they need. And there's a fuel administration, but it's never on the test, and it's run by Harry Garfield, James Garfield's son. But the idea of meatless Mondays and meatless Wednesdays, the Food Administration, Herbert Hoover, I've seen that. Okay? Another thing Herbert Hoover convinces Americans to do is, instead of buying food, maybe grow your own food. In a garden of some sort. A victory garden. So the idea of the victory garden becomes popular in World War I. That's why it's called the victory garden. Because you're growing your own food, pickling it, canning it, et cetera, et cetera. I remember growing up, my great-grandmother, she was, every weekend she was canning something. And they had a garden out in the side yard, and they grow their own vegetables and can it and stuff, and that came from World War II. But yeah, pickling and canning food, absolutely. Now, a lot of these factories are going to be operating 24/7, 3 shifts. With the electric light, you could have factories running 24/7. That means there's going to be a need for workers because a lot of workers in these factories are being drafted into the Army. Enter African Americans from the South moving to the northern industrial centers to take factory jobs, looking for opportunities. Let's be honest, the complexion of a lot of northern cities is going to change virtually overnight. White neighborhoods are now black neighborhoods because there are jobs available for people all in the northern area, the Midwest, out on the West Coast, wherever there's heavy industry, war materials production, shipbuilding, tank building, plane building, etc., etc. So you're going to see a huge movement of African Americans out of the segregated South, out of the Jim Crow South, the Plessy versus Ferguson South, and to the North, believing that they will experience more freedom, more opportunity, more equality. Northern whites are just as racist as Southern whites. At least Southern whites come right out and say, hey, we're racist. The Northern whites say, oh, yes, you're treating your African Americans so badly down there. Wait a minute, you're moving into my neighborhood? Hold everything. I always loved the story of Harlem. When I say Harlem, what do you think? New York. Well, yes, New York. It's a black neighborhood. The Harlem Renaissance of the 1920s is an African American cultural and artistic movement. Yeah, before World War I, Harlem was a Jewish neighborhood. It changed virtually overnight during World War I. You're going to see the same thing happen during World War II. The second Great Migration, as it's called. And you're going to see a lot of the same reaction, too. Whites don't want blacks moving to their neighborhoods. Women and the war. Where did they come down? Where did they stand on this? I would say that the women's movement, the women's suffrage movement in particular, is very divided over how to proceed. The North American Women's Suffrage Association They actually support Wilson and the war effort. Not because they believe in war, but because they're trying to get a women's suffrage amendment passed, and they need Woodrow Wilson's support to get it. Others, however, like Margaret Sanger and Jane Addams, they are true believers. They're pacifists. And they believe war is bad. Others are going to become vociferous in their opposition to the war because they believe Wilson is being a hypocrite. Wilson is talking about going around the world and making the world safe for democracy, yet he's slow pedaling on women's suffrage here at home. Everybody knew he was slow pedaling. He had promised a women's suffrage amendment when he ran for president in 1912 and didn't deliver. He ran for re-election in 1916 on a platform of women's suffrage amendment and didn't deliver. So Alice Paul and the National Women's Party call him out. That's who's protesting in front of the White House. And for protesting against President Wilson during a time of war, Alice Paul and her compatriots are arrested, thrown in Occoquan prison down in Virginia. Anybody ever see Iron-Jawed Angels? It's a made-for-HBO film. It's very good. I would love to show it here, but there is one scene of not frontal nudity, backal nudity. Is that what you call it? Back? Rear nudity. There you go. It's when the women are taken to Occoquan prison and they're all stripped and deloused and all that stuff. So, of course, I can't show it. But I show all the violence in the world. Jeanette Rankin, she's never on a test. She's never on a test. I just love the story of Jeanette Rankin because she's an interesting human being. She's an interesting bird. Jeanette Rankin, for you people playing Jeopardy at home, is the first woman elected to Congress. She is elected from the great state of Montana in 1916. She begins her congressional career in 1917, just in time for World War I to begin. When Wilson asks Congress for a declaration of war, she votes against it. And the people of Montana, of her congressional district, promptly vote her out of office the following year. So she serves 1 2-year term in Congress. Now wait a minute, I told you, whatever you see in World War I, you're going to see in World War II. Jeanette Rankin gets reelected to Congress in 1940. Oh. She starts her congressional term in 1941. December 7th, 1941, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Franklin Roosevelt goes to Congress and asks for a declaration of war. He gets a unanimous declaration of war, except for Jeanette Rankin. She's the only one who voted against declaring war on Japan, and the people of Montana voted her out of office the following year. So she served 2 2-year terms in Congress, and that's it. There you go. But that's why at least she's consistent. Eventually, women do get a suffrage amendment, the 19th Amendment, in 1920, and Wilson couches it, as he could couch it because he had suffered a stroke in 1919, but he couches it in, hey, women played a great role in helping us win the war, so they deserve to get this suffrage amendment now that I'm leaving office. Now that I'm heading out the door, good luck. Not that he would do this because he'd have to be wheeled out the door because he, again, suffered a stroke. Now, we go to war. Governments coordinate things, drafting people. We got to make sure that everybody supports the war. We've got to maintain support. We don't know how long we're going to be fighting this war. We didn't know we were only going to be in Europe for 11 months. It's like a vacation. But we needed to make sure that people bought into the war and the ideas that Wilson is trying to sell. Wilson is trying to sell this as a war to end all wars, as a war to make the world safe for democracy. We're going to take our democracy agenda on the road and provide democracy to everybody around the globe. It's progressivism on steroids. And so in order to make sure people are toeing the line, the government creates an agency devoted to selling the war. It's called the Committee on Public Information. It even sounds Orwellian. There are only like a couple of people who even understood what I meant by that. Like George Orwell. There you go. The state controlling the message. Telling you how to think, what to think. It's called the Creel Committee. It even sounds evil. And it's called the Creel Committee because the guy in charge of it was an advertising executive named George Creel. The Creel Committee. We're going to promote this war through film. Film! Wilson uses the media of the day to convey his message. Silent film, but film nonetheless. Pamphlets, posters, etc. They're the ones in charge of making the propaganda posters. It's like we did in World War II. We hired Hollywood stars and Hollywood executives to make pro-war films that celebrated America. And if you opposed the war, woe betide you. Because then you could be arrested. You were not allowed to criticize the war effort or the government. You could not criticize the president. You could not criticize the Congress. You could not criticize what we were doing. Wilson passes the Espionage and Sedition Act. Sedition, you've seen this before. Where? Alien and Sedition Acts. Who was the president? John Adams. John Jackson. John Adams. Guys, you got to start reviewing. You got to start reviewing. You cannot wait until a week before the exam to start reviewing. John Adams, Alien and Sedition Acts. It's the black mark on his presidency. And what was John Adams doing with the Alien and Sedition Acts? Yeah.
He was pretty much getting Jackson and his followers, or no, it was the conductor.
No, John Adams, not John Quincy Adams. John Adams.
Yeah.
Okay, going after immigrants who he believed might undermine America. What was it set against the backdrop of? There was a foreign policy crisis that it was set against the backdrop of. Yeah. No. No, you're thinking John Quincy Adams and Andrew Jackson. No. John Adams, George Washington's vice president, the second president of the United States. There is a foreign policy crisis that John Adams is dealing with that he feels necessitates him passing a law to protect national security, the Alien and Sedition Act. What is the event that's taking place during the first Adams presidency? Begins with a Q. The quasi-war. Absolutely. Guys, how many times have we looked at a presidential administration where the government overreaches in terms of limiting free speech, limiting your amendment rights because of national security. John Adams, with the Alien and Sedition Acts, said against the backdrop of the Quasi-War, I have to do this, otherwise national security is in peril. Abraham Lincoln, what's he do? Suspends habeas corpus. Arrests copperheads. Clement Vallandigham. Poor old Clement Vallandigham gets exiled to Canada. Why? To what? Save the Union. Thank you. I gotta save the Union. Wilson does it in World War I. Franklin Roosevelt, what does he do during World War II? Japanese Americans in internment camps. These are American citizens born in America. Executive Order 9066. All Japanese Americans of Japanese ancestry are to be removed from the west coast of America and placed in internment camps on the interior of the country for the duration of the war. Why? Why round up Japanese Americans? Why not German Americans? Why not Italian Americans? They were also our enemy. They look Japanese, therefore they might be spies. The Nixon administration does it during the Vietnam War. They use the power of the presidency. I would argue, overuse the power of the presidency to investigate and go after what they consider to be subversive elements in the civil rights movement and in the anti-war movement. The Patriot Act in the aftermath of 9/11, the USA Patriot Act, passed in 2001, gives the government broad, sweeping powers to protect national security, protect you against terrorists. You guys know they can look at you through your camera on the computer, right? Cover it. Good. Cover your. Go home. If you've got a webcam on your computer, cover it, because they can do that for your security, for your safety.
There was a website that would broadcast all the unsecure webcams.
Nice. Fantastic.
And you could look in like people's rooms and stuff.
Oh,
There
yeah.
was ones where there's like a baby sleeping.
Oh God. It's
So
like,
cover it so they can't
and then it winds up just being like chat roulette. All right, so thanks, Prada got it. All right, so what are we gonna get? Oh no. What are we gonna get? On. What are we gonna get? On.
Why do you know that?
Huh?
Why do you know that?
I have never been on chat roulette. All right. So anyway, so who gets rounded up in this? Well, first of all, espionage. What is espionage?
Spying.
Spying. Okay. Look, there was reason to believe there were German spies in America. Has anybody ever heard of the Black Tom event? There's something to look up. That's a World War I story. It's never on a test. It's never in a textbook or anything like that. Black Tom Island was was an arms depot outside of Jersey City near Hackensack. That's where they put all the bombs. One night in 1917, 16, 17, somewhere, I think before America entered the war, the arsenal at Black Tom exploded. Shrapnel all over the Statue of Liberty. It registered as a 5.5 earthquake on the Richter scale. It could be felt as far away as Maryland. They came to discover that the two security guards who were guarding the arms depot that night were actually German spies. And so it was an example of espionage. And so it gave the government reason to say, hey, if this happens here, we need to find spies elsewhere. Where else are there spies? And it creates an element of Paranoia. I love paranoia. It allows the government to do lots of things because people are afraid. What is sedition? You hear this word a lot, but nobody knows what it means. Does anybody know? To undermine the government through speech. To criticize the government. That's what sedition means. To undermine the government through speech or action. So who gets arrested in this dragnet? People like Alice Paul. Here's a poster put out by the National Women's Party depicting Alice Paul's treatment in prison at Occoquan. Notice what's happening to her. She's got the tube snaked down her throat. She's being force-fed. She was on a hunger strike in prison. The newspapers loved the Alice Paul story, and it generated a lot of sympathy for the women's suffrage movement. Eugene Debs. You've heard this guy's name before. Do you remember who he is? He was the head of the Pullman workers. He's a labor leader, but he's also an avowed socialist. And he believes that the war is a war concocted by rich people to subjugate the poor. He's thrown in jail. The man ran for president on the Socialist Party ticket like 4 times. The last time he ran for president was in 1920 while he was in jail and got 5% of the vote. Here's another guy that gets caught up in it. Charles Schenck. Now, Schenck gets arrested because he tells people not to obey the draft. You're drafted? It's illegal. The government can't do it. The government can't draft you. The government can't force you into the military against your will. Now, what the government can't force you to do that labor. What do you think Schenck justified that argument based on? In the Constitution, he has a constitutional argument. Possibly First Amendment violation. The government taking you, restricting your freedom, and forcing you to do work you don't want to do. He says it's a violation of the 13th Amendment banning slavery. It's an interesting argument. He's arrested and he's sued on the justification that the draft violates the 13th Amendment. This goes to the Supreme Court, and it's one of the Supreme Court cases you need to know because, well, not only is it on the test, but it's also a Supreme Court precedent that the Supreme Court uses today. This is the judgment of the Chief Justice. His name is Oliver Wendell Holmes. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of him. But there have only been 16 Chief Justices of the Supreme Court, so. Take a look at what he writes. And for the benefit of folks at home who can't really see it. The question in every case is whether the words used are used in such circumstances and are of such a nature as to create a clear and present danger that they will bring about the substantive evils that Congress has a right to prevent. What does that mean? What do you think it means? Because the government uses that argument today. The Supreme Court uses that argument today. walk around, whatever, I do what I want. No, that's not entirely the case. You can't do whatever you want. Yeah.
If you're saying something that creates danger to national security, then you could be arrested.
Correct. That is exactly it. If your speech creates an undue danger, the case that Oliver Wendell Holmes uses, or the instance that he uses as an example, yelling fire in a crowded theater. You can't do that because it creates a panic. What is the modern day equivalent of yelling fire in a crowded theater? What can't you say? And where can't you say it?
Bomb.
Bomb on an airplane. Darn right. Bomb, bomb. I'm going to have to ask you to sit down. Bomb, 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 bomb. You can't say bomb on an airplane. Oh, you can say it. There's going to be a consequence because you are creating a danger, a clear and present danger to the public. So you people all walking around with your First Amendment rights, thinking you're all constitutional scholars and that you can say and do whatever you want. That is not the case. And the government can step in at any time and infringe on your free speech. And this is the justification for it. Now, this paranoia over spies and this rah-rah American jingoism that you get is going to foment, I was like doing bellows here, it's going to foment this what was called 100% Americanism. America doesn't have room for hyphenated Americans. You're either American or you're not. You're not half. And it feeds this nativist sentiment. That nativism has always been there. Okay? We don't like the other. We get freaked out by different people. And we've always done it. The Irish and the Germans in the 1830s and 40s. The Italians and the Jews and the Russians and the Chinese in the late 1800s. Radicals and communists during World War I. Latinos and Southeast Asian people and Middle Eastern people in the latter part of the 20th century. People freak out. They get scared. They say, oh, this isn't the America I know. America's changing. It's being taken from. I hear that all the time. It's being taken from me. Taken by who? Who's taking it?
Robots.
Good God, man. I got it. You know, and just to bring this up, because it just bugs the crap out of me. Yeah. It bugs the crap out of me. I mean, you know, in the 1960s, 80% of the American population was white. 80% white in the 1960s. By 2060, 43% of the American people will be white. Old white people are freaking out about that. Your generation, it's cool, man. It's all good. We're a rainbow nation, baby.
Yeah.
And you know what? Even my generation. What are we? The Gen Xers, okay? My generation is kind of the boundary line in that. There are some in my generation's very divided. There are some in my generation who are totally cool with the idea of America changing because we understand America's always changed. And then there are some in my generation that are totally freaked out by that concept. Then you get to the older people, the Fox News watchers, the 65-year-old folks that are sitting at home with the tinfoil hats on. They are freaked out by the idea of a non-white America. They are freaked out. That's why they're getting their guns and, we gotta get it, we're gonna protect America. Because, I'm losing America, I'm losing it. Guys, you're not losing it, folks. It's just becoming cooler. It's becoming richer. It's becoming zestier. It's good, man.
I'm glad you got this on video.
No, I mean, the problem with a lot of people out there is they don't think through everything. If you look at American history, we have never just been one thing. We're constantly evolving, constantly changing. This is just one more step in that evolution. It's all going to be good. Here, you've got opposition to hyphenated Americans, just like you've got nativism today against hyphenated Americans. Oh, these people coming over here and they're speaking their wacky languages and whatnot. Relax, okay? It takes about a generation for everybody to start speaking English. Everybody chillax. Okay? My ancestors came over here. They were Italian. They language, bibbity bobbity, bibbity boobity boobity bobbity. They spoke a wacky language, and it's all good. I speak English. I speak good English. I speak English good. So it's all good, people. Everybody just chill out. Relax. We don't have room for hyphenated Americans. We started renaming all the German things. Like Frankfurters became hot dogs. Hamburgers, Salisbury steak. Sauerkraut, Victory cabbage. There you go. That one didn't stick. That one didn't stick. What's happening? Your battery is running low. Now, guys, a local civic organization is going to find new life against this backdrop of 100% Americanism. Oh, and by the way, the guy who talked about 100% Americanism, wait for it.
Oh.
Sorry. He's the guy that said we don't have room for hyphenated Americans.
Okay.
You can plug in right there. I know. Poor Teddy. Yep. But there is a local civic organization that is going to find new life against the backdrop of 100% Americanism. They're going to protect America, from the foreign elements, from the radical elements, from the crazy elements, from the bippity-boppity. And that local organization is the KKK. Where have they been? They've been underground since the 1870s, since Grant took it to them when Grant went to war with the KKK during Reconstruction. But now, boom, they're back, baby. And now, it's not just hating blacks, they hate everybody.
Yeah.
And yet, against that backdrop of paranoia, against the backdrop of racism, against the backdrop of, limiting your rights and all that, we're making the world safe for democracy. There's a cognitive disconnect here. Wilson laid out in what was called the 14 points, a peace plan, a vision statement, if you will, of what the post-war world was going to look like. And the capstone of all of it was the League of Nations, a body where nations' representatives could get together and hash out their plans, hash out their differences. Wilson is going to take this shot. He delivers this address to Congress in January 1918. First boots on the ground in January 1918. Wilson's talking about, open covenants of peace and freedom of the seas and low tariffs and, disarmament, and everybody gets along and everybody sings Kumbaya. Wilson takes that show on the road to Paris at the end of 1918. Wilson goes to Versailles. Wilson is seen as the savior of Europe. It was American troops and American supplies and American blah, blah, blah that saved Europe. And now Wilson goes to Europe, 14 points in hand, and says, this needs to be the peace. And the Allies, Britain and France, look at it and go, what? No. Getting rid of colonies? No. Lowering economic barriers? No. Where's the punishment for Germany? And so a lot of the 14 points gets watered down and compromised. The Republicans. Wilson never invited the Republicans to go with him to Europe. Big mistake. Because then the Republicans start to throw a temper tantrum. You didn't invite me to go to Europe, so we're going to block everything that you want to do. Wow, I've never heard of that before. Republicans throwing a temper tantrum and threatening to block everything. Never heard of it. The Dems are going to lose big in the 1918 elections, mainly because Wilson seems like he's disengaged. And that's the case because Wilson is in Paris for a year.
Allowed to govern a country.
That's the criticism. And the Republicans are like, this guy is out of the country. Can you imagine if Obama left the country for a year to go overseas and negotiate something? I mean, Sean Hannity's head would explode.
He is having a good time in Paris.
Apparently so. I mean, look at I'd soak all that in. Absolutely. Why would I want to come back to America? So Wilson goes to Versailles, presents the 14 points. It gets watered down into a punishment of Germany. Germany loses territory. Austria-Hungary gets broken up. The Russians lose territory because they had been on the Allies' side, but the Communist Revolution took place in 1917. They had signed a separate peace agreement with the Germans. They left early, so they lose territory. France and Britain are going to take advantage of this and basically kick Germany while it's down. And you get the Treaty of Versailles, which, the 14 points was supposed to be a peace with honor. But the Treaty of Versailles is a document that punishes. It punishes Germany. It takes away Germany's colonies. It takes away German territory. It takes away Germany's military. They're not allowed to have a military. And it makes Germany pay. Reparations. They pay war reparations that they cannot afford to pay. Even in the 1920s, the United States steps in and says, all right, look, we'll try and fix your debt problem here. We'll restructure the debt payments and whatnot. You won't have to pay 2% over the VIG or whatever. But no mobsters out there. All right, anyway. But even with the debt restructuring and the Dawes Plan of 1924, the German economy goes into free fall in the 1920s. Germany's a basket case, an economic and political basket case in the 1920s as a result of the Treaty of Versailles. It's the reason why Hitler's elected in 1933. But Wilson believed that he could compromise away the 14 points so long as he got the League of Nations, because he believed that if the League of Nations was there, any differences between countries could be solved. The League was the linchpin to the whole idea of peace after World War II, or World War I, pardon. So, of course, when Wilson comes back home with the Treaty of Versailles, with the League of Nations attached to it, the Republicans, who weren't invited to go to Europe, take a look at the treaty, and they say, no, we're not, no League of Nations. We're not supporting a League of Nations. This group of Republicans are called the irreconcilables. They couldn't be reconciled on the League of Nations. They would not support it. And I love Hiram Johnson's quote here. Not necessarily this one. My objections to the League have not been met by the reservations. I'll talk about the reservations in just a second. But this quote, America has arisen to a position where she is respected and admired by the entire world. She did it by minding her own business. The belief among the Republicans was that if the United States joined the League of Nations, we would be involved in putting out brush fires throughout the world in perpetuum. And that violates a central tenet of American foreign policy that goes all the way back to Washington. And what was it? Neutrality. It violates the Neutrality Proclamation. It violates the avoid entangling alliances idea that Washington had set forth. This is an entangling alliance, argues William Borah and Hiram Johnson. There are other Republicans that try to compromise. The reservationists, as they're called, they're okay with the Treaty of Versailles so long as there are changes made to the League of Nations. Basically, what Henry Cabot Lodge says in the Lodge Reservations is that the United States will not submit to arbitration or to inquiry by the Assembly or by the Council of the League of Nations. What does that mean? Yeah. We're in it, but we don't have to follow their rules. To which Wilson says, what's the point? Why belong to an organization if you're not going to follow the rules? So now you've got, because the Senate has to approve a treaty. Senate approves treaties. So now you've got a Treaty of Versailles with the Lodge Reservation put on it. And that is not what Wilson wants. Wilson fights back and tells Democrats, do not vote for this treaty with the Lodge Reservations on it. Wilson takes his case to the American people, and while he is out in Colorado, I believe, suffers a stroke, a debilitating stroke. He is unable to function. And so the one guy who could be the voice to argue for the League of Nations is done. He's gone. The Treaty of Versailles is defeated. It is not accepted by the Senate. And as a matter of fact, we don't join the League. We sign a separate peace treaty with Germany. We do not sign the Treaty of Versailles. We negotiated it. We wrote it, but we didn't accept it. Does that make sense? And poor Wilson spends the rest of his presidency, 1919 to 1921, essentially an invalid. You know who was running the show? His wife, Edith Galt Wilson. She was an interesting lady. And Wilson's paralysis and incapacitation couldn't come at a worse time, because as America is transitioning from wartime to peacetime, you're having disruptions in industry and labor. You're seeing a post-war recession take place. You're seeing people lose their jobs, high inflation, strikes all over the place. And the public are going to turn against labor unions. Labor unions had it great during the war. Now, when the war is over and you get this post-war recession, unions are going to strike. And the public is going to say, whoa, hey, labor unions, man, what are you guys, some sort of revolutionary group? You guys communists? Are you guys trying to undermine the government? And labor unions become the target of the government. Wow. Come on. There are also racial tensions as well. When whites come back from the war, and they come back to their neighborhoods, and they find blacks living in their neighborhoods, there are going to be problems. And you have race riots in northern cities and in Midwestern cities throughout 1919, 1920, 1921. Was Wilson a racist? Oh, I don't know. Let's take a look at this Wilson quote from the D.W. Griffith film Birth of a Nation in 1915. D.W. Griffith, who's kind of the Steven Spielberg of the silent film era, made a film called Birth of a Nation, which celebrated the creation of the KKK. It's an entire film about the creation of the KKK. And Wilson contributed a blurb to it. The white men were roused by a mere instinct of self-preservation until at last there had sprung into existence a great Ku Klux Klan, a veritable empire of the South to protect the Southern country. I think Wilson had a little bit of racism. Just a little. He had segregated all federal workplaces during the war. Comes out, basically supports the KKK. Marcus Garvey, in the face of all of this opposition from whites, in face of all this racial tension, advocates for blacks to frequent black-owned businesses. Blacks need to keep money within their own neighborhood. Blacks need to segregate themselves from whites. He says blacks and whites can't live together. So blacks need to own their own businesses, keep the money within their community, and he forms the United Negro Improvement Association in order to help facilitate that. And he says people need to get in contact with their African heritage. Take pride in being black. Take pride in being African. And eventually move back to Africa. That's the goal. The Back to Africa movement. And while Marcus Garvey may have been a bit crazy, he does inspire blacks to start exploring their black heritage, their African roots. And that's where you start to see the beginnings of the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. Black art, black culture, black poetry, black literature.
They didn't actually move back.
No! No, his goal was that blacks would move from America back to Africa. He would move to Africa with them and become their emperor. Emperor of the black people.
Where would they go? That's so far.
I don't know. Liberia? I mean, we created that country through the American Colonization Society. Who knows?
They're like so far removed from people that actually came.
I know.
That's like if I moved to Germany.
Right, exactly. It'd be like if I moved back to Italy. People wouldn't know what I'd be back there. Hey, what's going on? Bibbidi bobbidi boopity. You know. Scusi. Bibbidi bobbidi. Attorney General of the United States, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, is going to target labor unions, subversive organizations, and potential radicals like communists. There is a Red Scare after World War I. Because this comes on the heels of the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution. And when all these strikes start taking place in America after World War I, a lot of people believe that it's potentially communist-inspired. So, A. Mitchell Palmer and the Justice Department, with a new organization being founded, are going to go after supposedly subversive organizations. They're called Palmer raids. And they went after groups like the IWW, which admittedly were communist. I mean, the IWW, Big Bill Haywood, the guy who ran the IWW, basically, the IWW planted a pipe bomb in A. Mitchell Palmer's mailbox. But there is this Red Scare and panic and paranoia after World War I. Fear of the radical, fear of the communist, fear of the immigrant, fear of the other, the un-American. Labor unions are equivalent to Bolsheviks, communists. There you go, some good political cartoons. Put them out and keep them out. Keep the radicals out. I got a better cartoon for you. Come on. There you go. Close the gate. It's the immigrant here with the bomb for a head. There you go. Old bomb head. Fear of radicals, fear of communists. The government is going to pass a series of laws, the Emergency Quota Act and the National Origins Act, which basically shut off immigration, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe. All the Northern and Western Europeans, Protestants, they're welcome to come here. Anybody who wants to come from England and Ireland and Scotland and Norway, they're welcome to come here. But the other groups are verboten. They are not allowed to come here. Ellis Island, which had been the main entrepot for immigrants coming to America since the 1870s, Ellis Island shuts down in the 1920s. And a lot of people come out of the war. Think about what Wilson's stated goals of this war were. Democracy, freedom, an end to all war, peace. But what have we got? Panic, fear, trouncing your civil liberties. What has science and technology gotten us? Newer and more efficient ways of killing people. There's a great deal, we'll talk about Sacco and Vanzetti in the 20s. Don't worry about that. Americans come out of the war disenchanted. A lot of the goals that Wilson had laid out were not met. You've got economic instability, social instability, race wars, fear of immigrants, fear of communists. The war itself had been horrific. You've got 19th century armies going into battle with 20th century equipment. Lots of people died. People were fed up with idealism and democracy and freedom and the belief that you could create a perfect society. People were fed up with progressivism by 1920. You look at that chart. Document J on the DBQ. And the reason why there is such a downturn in voter participation is because people said, screw it, man, what has progressivism gotten us? Throughout the 1920s, you got the lost generation of writers writing about, depression and ennui, and there's a great word, ennui, E-N-N-U-I, ennui, a nice French word that basically conveys the idea of funk. Ennui. Criticizing America. Gertrude Stein.
Good morning, Southern reporting announcements will be on shortly.
And politically, Americans are going to vote for what Warren Harding called a return to normalcy, an end to progressivism, a return to the good old days where the government took a hands-off approach, people were allowed to do their thing without any regulation, and the American people ate that up with a spoon in 1920. Heck, the Republicans even won Tennessee. That'll show you how much Americans had turned against progressivism and the Democrats. They wanted to go back to the good old days.
Southern, today is Wednesday, March 12th, a B-Day. Please stand for your Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please be seated.
Are you in biology this year or need to pass biology?